Hi there. Today's book is another in the series on Special Forces, and it's this book, Soldier 5 by Mike Coburn. Mike was a New Zealander, and he was doing his military service in New Zealand when he decided to attempt selection for New Zealand SAS. And in 1984 there was over 300 people applied at the beginning, whittled down. They go through a pre-selection process, and in the end just 5 were on actual selection. He passed the 3-week selection process and then went into the training cycle, had some hiccups on the patrol procedures, but basically passed. But then was called in to see the boss and told he needed more experience, and was sent back to the infantry for a year. Returned, retook the training cycle, no problems with any part of it. Went through the whole thing, combat survival, etc., and completed and was badged. One of the things he talks about was subsequent training for mountain training on the North Island of New Zealand, 3,000 meter range of mountains, and what was supposed to be a training exercise excuse me, turned into an actual survival situation. They were in an ice blizzard at high altitude, and they were actually having to put the survival training into action. So New Zealand SAS has 2 squadrons. Mike Coburn, as I've said his name, which is a pseudonym, was posted to B Squadron, Air Troop, and at the time they were on the Black Roll, which is the counter-terrorist team, which was a year's commitment. So they go through all the training for the assault troop, the sniper troop, etc. But due to some admin changes, they were kept on Black Roll for a 2nd year. So he did 2 years on the counter-terrorist team. Then went back into the Green Roll and went through his freefall training. Now, a problem in the New Zealand Air Force, New Zealand Army, particularly at the time, was lack of resources, and they had a socialist government. Later on, of course, New Zealand took part in the Great War on Terror, and the New Zealand SAS did a lot of tremendous things. But at the time, the resources were being denied to them, and the New Zealand Air Force didn't have much in the way of lift assets. So opportunities for parachuting, particularly for freefall, were rather limited. And then B Squadron of 22 SAS came over to New Zealand, and 7 Troop, the Air Troop, brought a hair with them, and they were able to do a lot of training, and invited the New Zealand counterparts along, and he got to train alongside the guys from the UK, and the whole trip climaxed in a rugby match. One of the guys in B Squadron was a former New Zealand SAS guy called Ken, and they sounded him out about the idea of going over to the UK. In the event, Mike Coburn and another chap called Pete decided to make the trip over and leave New Zealand and head for sunny England. And there was a chap, a senior NCO called Blue, another former Kiwi SAS guy, who was the point of contact, and he made a lot of arrangements for them, fixed them up with a cottage. There was a car they were able to buy, and gave them a build-up training plan for selection. So they start going out to the Brecons and start having a look at the routes and the challenges involved. And both of the guys decided that they would attempt the fan dance as a benchmark for where they were, what they needed to do. So they do that. In the event, they both pass selection and go through the whole thing, go off to Brunei, to the jungle, come back to combat survival, the whole gamut. And just as they complete combat survival, the first Gulf War's kicking off. And they're posted to A Squadron, and Mike goes to Boat Troop, which he welcomes because he'd already done free fall and he wanted to try something different. So they deploy out to the Gulf, but unfortunately, from his point of view, he is then put on loan to B Squadron, who needs some guys, and he ends up being a member of the famous Bravo 20 patrol led by Andy McNabb. So he talks about the planning for that, the build-up training. His one of his main responsibilities was communications, and he talks about the decision not to take vehicles, which later on was criticised and debated, but he gives the reasons why the patrol, and it was a patrol decision, it wasn't just one guy decided not to do that. The story's very well told now. Andy McNabb wrote his book, Chris Ryan's written a book, other people have written books, so the broad details are very, very well known. Mike Coburn's version is his own version. It differs somewhat from some of the other versions, but that's to be expected. Everyone's got their own point of view. He was captured and went through a harsh capture in Baghdad, and then was repatriated by the Red Cross. Talks about all that. They get back, and they are brought in to see the Colonel, Johnny Holmes, and the first thing he says to them, which makes the collective jaws drop, is, "You're not going to be court-martialed." And it turns out that his view of the whole thing was completely at odds with their view, and he states this quite openly, he had been prepared to sacrifice guys and leave them and not risk any air platforms to go and look for them. And he was quite ruthless in this, and you may have an opinion about that. So basically, once the main problem on the Bravo 20 thing was they were given the wrong frequencies. They couldn't contact the headquarters, so they couldn't get extracted. And in the event, even had they been able to communicate, it seems that both the Colonel and the RSM weren't prepared to extract them. The A&E plan really has been criticised as going the wrong way. Should have headed for Jordan, which was a nominally friendly country, or friendlier than Syria. So there is that. But that's what they were told to do. So, shall we say, the scales fell from his eyes somewhat after that, with regards to how the regiment was run by the senior element. Eventually he decides to leave, and he writes this book, and giving his side of the story. Now, just to put into perspective the whole thing about Bravo 20, it was first written about by DLB, General Peter de la Billière. He was the British military commander in the Gulf War, and in his book, Storm Command, he put the main details of a little bit of Bravo 2 but mainly of Chris Ryan's epic escape and evasion. And what had happened was a researcher for the general had gone into Hereford and been given access to the files, and Chris Ryan had been ordered to sit down and talk to this guy. He didn't want to do it, didn't want to tell his story publicly. He was ordered to, so he went down and told his story. And so it was published, a very successful book. Subsequently, Chris Ryan decides to write his book, and also Andy McNabb wrote his book, and that wasn't looked upon as favourably. And eventually it was decided that to prevent further memoirs being written, guys would have to sign an agreement not to talk, kind of a non-disclosure agreement, to continue service in Special Forces. Anyway, so Mike returned to New Zealand. He wants to publish the book. The UK government decides they don't want him to do it, and start putting all sorts of pressure on him, right up to High Court injunctions and so on, and there's a court case in New Zealand. Now, when I read that part of this book first, it was exactly the same procedures that they used after World War II to suppress some of the memoirs. I reviewed a book by Clutty, who was the escape and evasion expert who made all the kits, the escape kits, and he'd written his book, and the British government wanted it suppressed, and he pointed out that it was already in the public domain. He was able to produce the newspaper articles that had been okayed about it, and he won his case, but it didn't stop the government spending money to have it suppressed, and the same thing happened here. And Mike Coburn's lawyers were able to demolish the arguments that the British government put up, and the book has been published. So it's an interesting read from many points of view, particularly if you're rather cynical about how decisions are made in the military, how the senior levels of the officers are quite willing to sacrifice the guys, and also the British government's attempt to suppress any kind of revelations which they think may be embarrassing, even if they're not. So really interesting book, and it's another version of the story of the well-known Bravo 2.